So when I was asked to give a talk on the Beethoven Variations, I immediately thought of a passage from a novel that I think is one of the best writings about music from modern literature. It's a short passage from Milan Kundera's Book of Laughter and Forgetting. And so that's really my talk. I'm stealing the whole thing. And so all I'm going to do is try to give a little bit of window dressing before and maybe a little window dressing after, and let the literature speak for itself. So Milan Kundera wrote this book in Paris when he was in exile from his native Czechoslovakia, which was behind the Iron Curtain. Czechoslovakia had, in the 1960s, 1961, I think, maybe somebody can correct me, appointed as a, quote, puppet by Moscow, was a rather intellectual, liberal, new leader named Alexander Dubček. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember these events. And Dubček liberalized the country. There was freedom of expression. It was a renaissance for filmmakers and poets and musicians and artists and writers, journalists even. And then in August of that same year, the tanks rolled in and squelched the whole blossoming was cut off at the root, and thousands of writers, architects, poets, musicians, intellectuals, and ordinary people either went into hiding or into prison or into exile, as Kundera did. Now, Kundera was sort of an artist of all trades. He was a jazz musician, he was a filmmaker, as well as a writer. And his father was a great musician. His father was a pianist. He was on the compositional faculty and maybe even the head of the conservatory at Bernau. I can't remember. And he was a Beethoven scholar. And in this novel, and it is a novel, and it's a novel in the form of a theme and variations, by the way, all of a sudden he starts writing about, completely sort of out of context, he starts writing about his father. And he starts writing from first person. Now he's Kundera writing about his father, not a character in the novel, or maybe they're all characters, I don't know, or maybe all the world's a play. It's one of these, sort of reality interceding and blurring the genre. I just wanted to mention one other thing before I read it. The topic is timely. The issue of Beethoven's theme and variations, his obsession with the genre of taking a melody and writing variations on it, has been rather in the press recently because a new play was staged off-Broadway. I think it was off-Broadway, starring Jane Fonda, 74 years old, playing the part of a musicologist who is at the end of her life. She has a terminal illness, and she is obsessed with trying to figure out why Beethoven wrote variations at the end of his life, specifically the Diabelli variations, where this music editor had written this little waltz and gave it to different composers, asking them to compose a variation on it, and he was going to publish it. And Beethoven, not to sort of be one among many, right, even if he was the first among many, wrote 33 variations on this one little melody. And some of these variations are among the most tender, profound, heartfelt, comical. I mean, he takes the entire range of human experience and takes each one of those experiences and puts it into his variations. And of course, the last movement of the Ninth Symphony, maybe the most famous thing he ever wrote, is in the form of theme and variations. Da, 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 da. Listen to it. Listen to it and come back again, and then come back again, and then come back again, and each time it's somehow different. The instrumentation is different, the harmony is different, the embroidery of the counter melodies is different. And this, why? I mean, the musicologist in the play is asking why, and so that prepares the scene here. So, during the last 10 years of his life, my father gradually lost the power of speech. He'd had a stroke. At first, he simply had trouble calling up certain words or would say similar words instead and then immediately laugh at himself. At the end, he had only a handful of words left, and all his attempts at saying anything more substantial resulted in one of the last sentences he could articulate. That's strange. Whenever he said, that's strange, his eyes would express infinite astonishment at knowing everything and being able to say nothing. Things lost their names and merged into a single undifferentiated reality. I was the only one who, by talking to him, could temporarily transform that nameless infinity into the world of clearly named entities. His unusually large blue eyes still stared out of his handsome old face as intelligently as before. I often took him for walks. We would walk once around the block. That was all he had strength for. He had trouble walking. He took tiny steps, and as soon as he felt the least bit tired, his body would tilt forward and he would lose his balance. We had to stop so that he could lean his forehead against the wall and rest. During the walks, we talked about music. When Father could speak normally, I hadn't asked him many questions. Now I wanted to make up for it. So we talked about music. It was an unusual conversation. One of the participants knew nothing but a lot of words, and the other knew everything but no words. Through the 10 years of his illness, Father worked steadily on a long study of Beethoven's sonatas, the piano sonata. He wrote somewhat better than he spoke, but even while writing, he would suffer more and more memory lapses until finally no one could understand the text. It was made up of words that did not exist. Once he called me into his room. The variations from the Opus 111 sonata were open on the piano. "Look," he said, pointing to the music. He had also lost his ability to play the piano. "Look." And then, after a prolonged effort, he managed to add, "Now I know." He kept trying to explain something important to me, but the words he used were completely unintelligible, and seeing that I didn't understand him, he looked at me in amazement and said, "That's strange." I knew what he wanted to talk about. He had been involved with the topic a long time. Beethoven had felt a sudden attachment for the variation form toward the end of his life. This little set that we just played was written in 1797. He's a young man. Now we're talking about at the end of his life when he returned to this form and this obsession. Beethoven had felt a sudden attachment to the variation form toward the end of his life. At first glance, it might seem the most superficial of forms, a showcase for technique, the type of work better suited to a lace maker than to a Beethoven. But Beethoven made it one of the most distinguished forms and imbued it with some of his finest meditations. True, all this is well known, but what Father wanted to know was, what are we to make of this? Why did he choose variations? What lay behind his choice? That is why he called me into his room, pointed to the music, and said, "Now I know." I understand now the remorse of losing someone we love. When my father died, I had a bad case of it. I couldn't forgive myself for asking him so little, for knowing so little about him, for losing him. In fact, it was that very remorse that suddenly made me see what he must have meant to tell me the day he pointed to the Opus 111 sonata. Let me try to explain by means of an analogy. The symphony is a musical epic. We might compare it to a journey leading through the boundless reaches of the external world, on and on, farther and farther. Variations also constitute a journey, but not through the external world. You recall Pascal's famous meditation about how man lives between the abyss of the infinitely large and the infinitely small. Well, the journey of the variation form leads to a second infinity, the infinity of internal variety concealed in all things. What Beethoven discovered in his variations was another space and another direction. In that sense, they are a challenge to undertake a different journey. The variation form is the form of maximum concentration. It enables enables the composer to limit himself to the matter at hand, to go straight to the heart of the matter. The subject is a theme, which often consists of no more than 16 measures. Beethoven goes as deeply into those 16 measures as if he had gone down a mine to the bowels of the earth. The journey of the second infinity is no less adventurous than the journey of the epic, and closely parallels the physicist's descent into the wondrous innards of the atom. With every variation, Beethoven moves farther and farther from the original theme, which bears no more resemblance to the final variation than a flower to its image under a microscope. Man knows that he cannot embrace the universe with all its suns and stars, but he finds it unbearable to be condemned to lose the second infinity as well, the one so close, so nearly within reach. My friend Tamina lost the infinity of her love. I lost my father. We all lose in whatever we do, because if it is perfection we are after, we must go to the heart of the matter, and we can never quite reach it. That the external infinity escapes us, we accept with equanimity. The guilt of letting the second infinity escape as well follows us to the grave. While pondering the infinity of the stars, we ignore the infinity of our Father. It is no wonder, then, that the variation form became the passion of the mature Beethoven, who, like my friend, like myself, knew all too well that there is nothing more unbearable than losing a person we love, those 16 measures and the infinite universe of their infinite possibilities.